So welcome to hearing our program with a Band of Steady Habits. We have to thank the Connecticut Humanities for funding this. That was really great. They gave us a grant that enables us to pay for this, which is wonderful. We've had a year-long program on Irish experience here in Windham and Willimantic. And we had a terrific exhibit that was up for a while that probably most of you have come to see. It was a really great exhibit that was built out of artifacts that were loaned to us by the local community. And we've had a number of events that have dealt with the same topic. And this is the last one. So this is the capstone of the entire thing. So this is a program that combines music and it combines video and all sorts of other things to tell the story of the Irish experience here in Connecticut, and all the history that goes with this. I saw this program performed last spring at the meeting of the Association for the Study of Connecticut History, and it just is fantastic. So I just, without further ado, would like to give our state historian, Walt Woodward, and his Band of Steady Habits to teach us all about Irish migration to Connecticut.
Thank you so much. Hi, thank you all for coming out. This is terrific. Let me ask a question before we begin. How many of you are of Irish descent or Irish? Well, there is no question that this is absolutely your people's story. How many of you are Americans? It's your story too. And when we began working on this story, when I started putting this together more than a year ago, it was meant to be a story about the Irish. Since then, it's become a real American story because there's a lesson in the story of the Irish that is important right now, and it applies to all of us. And that's all I'm going to say. Maybe we can talk about it at the end. We don't even have to, but let's see.
Oh, all the comrades that e'er I had are sorry for my going away, and all the sweethearts that e'er I had would wish me one more day to stay, but since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and I'll softly go. Good night and joy be with you all.
Since the early 1600s, more than 7 million Irish men and women have parted with home, family, friends, and history, and left errand for the American hope of a better life. Many found it, many did not. But in their coming, they transformed America, and America transformed them. Today, nearly 40 million Americans claim an Irish heritage, and American culture is partially, proudly, and indelibly influenced by its Irish inheritance. Hundreds of thousands of Erin's children made their way to Connecticut. Their tide of immigration had 6 distinct phases. And today, with the help of the Band of Steady Habits, I'll describe each of them and how they affected those who came, the people among whom they settled, and the places they settled in. But first, let me introduce this talented band of brothers and sisters with whom I am so happy to make music. We've been together a little over a year now. We got together with an idea of doing a new kind of history lecture. Most history lectures that have music are about historical music. We said, what if you told historical stories, but you supplemented them with music that amplified that story rather than was the focus of the story? So we thought it would be a good idea, and we worked together, and it's been wonderful. And the most wonderful part, I think, has been working with this group of people. So let me introduce them to you. You've already heard their lovely voices. These are the identical twin sisters, Rachel Smith and Tegan Smith. Not identical twins, of course, not even sisters. But they have been best friends since they were kids. They've sung together in choirs since they were kids. And just before we started, we were running through one of the songs, and I looked at Tegan and I said, you weren't watching Rachel to know when to cut off. And they both simultaneously said, like the double mint chewing gum twins, oh, we don't have to. So they are perfect. And what beautiful voices. Then on my right is the fastest banjo player east of the Mississippi, probably our ringer musician, Jeremy Teitelbaum, who, if he was a ringer musician like the rest of us, we'd be on a bus somewhere reminiscing about the 60s, but no, he took a different path. And he is now the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, the largest college at the University of Connecticut. How cool is that? My dean, the banjo-picking speed demon. It's awesome. To his left is the glue that holds the band together, and someone who certainly needs no introduction in Wyndham, anywhere in Wyndham, or in other jails throughout Connecticut. And that's Duke York, our resident curmudgeon. He's the guy. Well, we've been doing this for about a year. It's half the fun of having this band are the practices and the kind of just the joy of being together. And we hope some of that comes through as we play for you. Now let's go back to the Irish. Americans commonly think about Irish immigration in terms of the Great Hunger, right? This is unfortunate, for it ignores the long history of Irish immigration before and after that desperate time. Between Connecticut's founding in 1636 and American independence, nearly 400,000 Irish immigrants came to the New World, some voluntarily, others quite against their will. Most came to North America, though not to New England. Early Irish migrants actively avoided New England if they had a choice, and with good reason. First, New England was populated almost entirely by Puritans with the same anti-Catholic and anti-Irish prejudices as their English counterparts. Moreover, New Englanders' anti-Catholic hostility was amplified by a long series of wars with French Catholic Canada, who regularly sent converted Catholic Indian allies to devastate and destroy frontier English settlements. In addition to religious hostility and ethnic racism, New England lacked economic opportunity, offering only subsistence agriculture, long winters, and no cash crop. Some Irish were in colonial Connecticut, though often not by choice. Edmund Fanning, for example, whose family had fought the English in Limerick, was sold along with his wife and children as indentured servants at New London in 1654. Fanning served out his indenture and later became a founder of Stonington. Transport of Irish servants to Connecticut occurred intermittently throughout the colonial period. A 1764 newspaper ad, for example, offered a parcel of Irish servants to be sold cheap in Stamford. In 1783, Captain Robert Winthrop sold some of his cargo of 231 formerly imprisoned Dubliners in New London. Over time, too, a trade in flaxseed developed between Connecticut farmers and men in Ireland's linen trade. This attracted free Irish seamen, merchants, and farmers knowledgeable in flax horticulture to come to Connecticut. One historian found 205 men with Irish surnames in Connecticut records before 1800. Many were presumably married, and with New England's average family size of 8 children, the total number of colonial Irish Connecticutans must have been substantial. This helps explain why more than 800 Celtic names appear on the registers of Connecticut men who fought for American independence, and why George Washington's adopted son said, "Let the shamrock be entwined with the laurels of the Revolution, and the pen of history inscribe eternal gratitude to Irishmen." Here's a song of Irish origin that comes to us from the American Revolution. Originally called Shula Ruin, we know it best now as Johnny Has Gone for a Soldier. Ready? 1, 2, 1. There she sits on Buttermilk Hill. Who could blame her crying her fill? And every tear would turn a mill. Johnny has gone for a soldier.
Me, oh my, I loved him so. It broke my heart to see him go. Only time will heal the wound. Johnny has gone for soldier. She'll dye her dress, she'll dye it red, and in the streets go begging for bread. The one she loves from her has fled. Johnny has gone for soldier. Johnny has gone for a soldier.
Curiously, there's little evidence of Catholic practice among these pre-revolutionary Irish migrants. That's not too surprising, really, since celebrating Mass in Connecticut was illegal until 1818. No priests lived in Connecticut before the 1800s either, and in truth, throughout this early period, it seems that New England's Irish migrants downplayed both Irishness and, if not Protestant, their Catholicism to better fit into Puritan society. This rejection of Irish ethnic identity only happened during this early period, and it produced in Connecticut a group of Irish immigrants who intentionally worked to blend in with the New Englanders around them. But all that changed between American independence and the Great Hunger. By the 1840s, Even as famine refugees began to board the coffin ships, any hope they might blend peacefully into Connecticut Yankee society were as blighted as the potato plants they left behind. Both Ireland and Connecticut changed dramatically in the early 1800s. Ireland experienced a short-term economic boom and a population explosion, increasing from 4 to 7 million people by 1821. But the economic collapse that followed the Napoleonic Wars brought to Ireland a sudden, severe crisis. As a result, Irish emigration increased dramatically. The trickle of incoming Irish during early American settlement became a steady flow, then a rushing stream. Over 100,000 people left Erin for America in the short interval between 1780 and 1810. That number increased to 1 million by 1840. And while pre-revolutionary immigrants were mostly Northern Ireland Protestants headed for the American South, the new immigrants were Catholics from Munster and Connaught, who came to the cities of the American North. Old-line Connecticut Yankees viewed this gathering swarm with fear and loathing. Government in the land of steady habits was still run by actual descendants of the Puritan leaders 200 years earlier. Those who voted for them were also 90% descendants of the original stock. Connecticutans were Puritan in faith and law, Anglophiles in disposition, and Federalists in politics. But they also faced some harsh realities. 200 years of over-farming and large families meant there was no longer enough Connecticut land to give to adult children, and what land there was already overworked, and it wasn't fertile. Like Ireland, Connecticut in the early 1800s experienced a vast outmigration of its youth to the new lands of the American West. The last thing Connecticutans needed or wanted was an influx of wild, work-seeking papists. Fortunately, the last thing Irish immigrants wanted was no work in bad soil, and so at first they stayed away, clustering in New York and later Boston. But Connecticut soon found the key to its economic future through its abundance of water power that could drive machines of industry and mass-produce the fabrics, clocks, guns, tools, utensils, and tinware needed by a modernizing society. Just as the tide of Irish immigrants became a rushing stream, the streams of New England began the transformation that made Connecticut an industrial colossus. Yankees in the land of steady habits might not want to live among Irish papists, but they would soon find it useful and then absolutely necessary. The trigger event was the 1825 opening of the Erie Canal that instantly made New York City the nation's premier financial and trade center. Canal fever swept the country. In Connecticut, that fever centered on New Haven, which looked at the Connecticut River and dreamed of opening a water passage to Montreal. On July 4th, 1825, city elites broke ground on the 86-mile Farmington Canal to Massachusetts. Hartford merchants immediately answered with their own Enfield Canal project. To dig the Farmington Canal, contractors brought in 28 gangs of Irish laborers from Galway and Cork. Hartford brought in 400 Irishmen. Life for these navvies was absolute hell. Like the Irish railroad workers who followed them, they dug furiously, sun up to sunset, goaded by contractors whose profits depended on how much labor they could extract. Eyewitnesses marveled at the physical prowess of the Irish as they ran full wheelbarrows up narrow planks from ditches 20 feet deep. They lived in shanty camps where overcrowding, poor sanitation, and stagnant water made disease a constant. Alcohol was woven into the workday, marked by bursts of furious digging, followed by a trip to the whiskey barrel for a dram from the jitterbox. They were paid only for days weather and their health let them work, and they made just 75 cents, 1/3 less than Native American workers. The despicable conditions drove some men to drink, some to fight, some to religion, and some to all three. And sometimes it even drove a man to song, as it did the man who wrote this one called Working on the Railway. Ready? Fasten your seatbelts. 1, 2, 1, 2. Ori-ori-ori-o, ori-ori-ori-a, ori-ori-ori-o, to work upon the railway. Wow. In 1842, I left the old world for the new. That is a luck that brought me through to work upon the railway. Ori-ori-ori-o, ori-ori-ori-a, ori-ori-ori-o, to work upon the railway. When we left Ireland to come here and spend our latter days each year, our bosses aided troops from here and backwards on the railway.
Our boss's name, it was Cockayne. He kept the store to rob the men, a Yankee clerk with ink and pen to cheat out on the railway. It had to do this and that, do that, without a stocking or cravat, and nothing but an old straw hat while backwards on the railway. Ori-ori-ori-o, ori-ori-ori-a, ori-ori-ori-o, to work upon the railway.
In 1843, 'twas then I met Miss Biddy McGee, and an elegant wife she was to me while working on the railway.
In 1847, Biddy McGee, she went to heaven. If she left one child, she left 7 to work upon the railway.
48, I learned to drink my whiskey straight as an elegant wife and can't be blamed for working on the railway. Ori-ori-ori-o, ori-ori-ori-a, ori-ori-ori-o, to work upon the railway. Ori-ori-ori-o, ori-ori-ori-a, ori-ori-ori-o, to work upon the railway. Fiddle-me-ori-ori-o, fiddle-me-ori-ori-a, fiddle-me-ori-ori-o, to work upon the railway. I can't tell you how much fun that is to sing, especially when you start on the right. The navvies were Connecticut's first major influx of Irish Catholics, and the descendants of Connecticut's Puritan founders didn't like it one bit. Connecticut had no priests, and the Yankees made it clear they did not want any. When Reverend John Powers of New York asked to say Mass at New Haven, he was told, "We have no popery in New Haven, and we don't want any." And when, despite such resistance, Hartford became the seat of Connecticut's first Catholic church and resident priest, a paper sneered, "How will it read in history that in 1829, Hartford, in the state of Connecticut, was made the center of a Roman Catholic mission?" The incoming Irish, whose speech, dress, and religion seemed an affront to Connecticut norms, faced unrelenting prejudice only centuries of anti-Catholic hatred and Anglo-ethnic racism could produce. Newspapers demeaned Irish dress, language, character, intelligence, pugnacity, and intemperance. The Reverend Horace Bushnell, whose name is still honored at Bushnell Park surrounding our state capitol, was a leading spokesman for this anti-Irish content. If you glance over the catalogs of our colleges and universities, the advertisements of merchants and mechanics, he told his congregation, you will almost never find an Irish name among them, which shows that they do not rise among us. If you search the almshouses and prisons and potters' fields, there you will find their names in thick order. The inference was clear. The Irish were innately inferior. Despite such prejudice, 720 Catholics, many former canal workers, made Connecticut home in 1835. Why did they stay? Conditions in Ireland meant going back wasn't an option, and grinding poverty made going anywhere impossible for some. But there was also work to be had, and in the urban ghettos coalescing around the two Catholic churches in Hartford and New Haven, new Irish communities were forming, with grocers, saloons, church societies, and political leaders attuned to Irish needs and Irish interests, in a new and unfriendly place. They became the seedbed for a new kind of Irish person, the Connecticut Irish American. And they appeared none too soon, for the next decade brought a tsunami of Irish immigrants who would shake the land of steady habits to the core. The Irish stream became a torrent, even before the 1845 potato famine. As early as 1839, Connecticut Peter Parley wisely warned Americans to pay attention. Ireland is an unhappy country, he wrote. Not one person in 100 there is proprietor of the land from which his substance is drawn. Thousands lie down every night, not knowing how they may obtain the bread of tomorrow. Our happier country is the asylum to which multitudes are flying. They are found by thousands in our larger cities. They penetrate the interior, and whether we look to their own happiness or their influence upon our institutions, they may fairly claim the attention of every intelligent American citizen. And claim Americans' attention they did, especially after the famine struck. During the potato blight, almost 1 million Irish people starved to death. The British response was totally ineffective and morally bankrupt. In the face of unthinkable desperation, those who could get out got out. The U.S. saw 924,000 immigrants by 1850, 2 million more by 1855. One, two, three, four. All you young men, I pray, draw near now. Give ear to the words that I'm going to say. I'm here to tell you that the people of Ireland are emigrating to America. Oh, yes, indeed, they are emigrating. This poor country they can't stand. They put their foot on board of a ship as they're sailing off to the Yankee land.
And the night before they're due for leaving, all the neighbors in the house do throng, for to take a farewell glance or otherwise to sing a song.
Well, they dance all night to the early morning, each man cutting all around the floor.
And mother, she comes in, says, weep and see your children to the door.
The father looks around the cabin, sees that he is all alone. Surely his poor heart's a-breaking, his salt tears would melt a stone. And accursed nation in this world that e'er was seen. All they're going for is process serving in that little Isle of Green. And for all for the gallant sons of Erin, this poor country they can't stand. They put their blood on board of the ship of the sailing off to the Yankee land. Most migrants came through Liverpool to New York City. Though only 18% settled there permanently, by 1860, 1 of every 4 New Yorkers was Irish. 25% of Irish immigrants came to New England because, despite Yankee prejudice, the Industrial Revolution had created an immense labor demand. Father John O'Hanlon accurately described the opportunities. The work consists in great part, so far as laborers are concerned, in the making and opening of sewers and trenches for waters and gas pipes, in grading, leveling, and paving streets or levees, in digging cellars and foundations for houses, all of which are mostly carried on by use of the spade or mattock, at which the Irish excel. Factories needed both skilled and unskilled laborers, but the Irish got only the unskilled jobs. In 1850, Irish held 2/3 of Hartford's poorly paid, dirty, dangerous, and often part-time unskilled jobs. 90% of Irish women were domestic servants for Yankee families, who profited from their labor even as they cast aspersions on their intelligence, lack of polish, and religion. Poor and unwanted, though needed as workhorses, the Irish huddled together in urban ethnic enclaves characterized by poverty, squalor, alcoholism, and pugnacity. The Hill in New Haven, Dublin in Danbury, and in a name that speaks volumes about the local view of the Irish, Pigsville in Hartford. Yankees watched the Irish Catholic ghettos grow with angry anxiety. This was the antithesis of what the land of steady habits had always stood for. Horace Bushnell preached, "Catholic immigrants are pouring into our country. Every one of them and their descendants is meant to be our enemies, and most of them probably will be." The Hartford Observer warned that allowing Catholics into Connecticut was like allowing an invasion of savages on our western borders. One of the day's most popular journalists was Thomas Nast, whose editorial cartoons were virulently anti-Irish and anti-Catholic. Let's look at a few. How about this one? It's called the American River Ganges. And here you see bishops coming up like alligators onto a shore as one of those Federalists defends the children from the attacking horde. Or how about this one that ridicules Irish pretensions to America? Oh yeah, you can be an American boyo. Or how about this one that compares the Irish to the blacks with whom they often competed for work? Spurred by Connecticut's fear-mongering, arsonists burned down New Haven's Catholic Church in 1848. The defiant Irish immediately rebuilt it, while creating a way they thought would be pretty effective in preventing future attacks. In 1849, New Haven men formed an all-Irish militia group, the Washington Arena Guards. The organizers were the Irish shop and saloon keepers, skilled workers, and ward leaders who informally led the ghetto community, providing information, credit, and links to political patronage. They learned quickly that their fastest avenue to power in America would be through politics, specifically alignment with the Democratic Party that opposed the traditional Yankee standing order. Their ghetto concentrations gave them voting clout, first in local elections, and as their numbers grew, in state elections too. And they used that clout to defend the people who defended them. Expressing fervent American patriotism along with Irish nationalism, the Washington Arena Guards drilled 3 years without weapons until the state elected a Democrat governor in 1852. By then, Irish militia units had formed in 4 Connecticut towns, and the politically savvy Thomas Seymour rewarded his Irish supporters by incorporating all 4 into the state's 2nd Regiment. But the addition of armed Irish troops to the Connecticut militia amped up the state's already intense anti-Irish paranoia, and it led to the rise of the Know-Nothings, an anti-Irish Catholic political movement to stop immigration and end Irish voting rights. In 1855, the Know-Nothings took over Connecticut government, and one of their first acts was to disband all the Irish militia. Mid-19th century Connecticutans might well think the Irish were taking over. Certainly they were changing the land of steady habits into something previously unknown. Between 1851 and 1855, 22 new Catholic churches were built. Parochial schools opened and orphan asylums founded. Connecticut's Irish population had increased 77 times over in 20 years, and now 1 out of every 8 Connecticutans was foreign-born Irish. The Know-Nothings' grip on Connecticut politics was short-lived, for soon the country was embroiled in the American Civil War. Suddenly, disbanding the Irish militia seemed short-sighted at best. An apologetic Republican governor, William Buckingham, requested the Irish units to reactivate in defense of the Union, and they did so enthusiastically. 1,200 Irish volunteers joined the gallant 9th Connecticut Regiment, and they marched south under an emerald green battle flag. They saw combat in Louisiana and Virginia, and 250 of them died, most while digging a canal during the siege of Vicksburg. Altogether, more than 6,000 Irish Connecticutans fought for the Union, and they won true respect for their patriotism. To some, the Irish now became Americans in peace or war, but to others, they still remained suspect. Here's a Tim O'Brien song about an Irishman who fought at Vicksburg and died years later at Custer's last stand. It's called Mick Ryan's Lament. Well, my name is Mick Ryan, I'm lying still in a lonely spot where I was killed by a red man defending his native land in a place that they called Little Big Horn. And I swear I did not see the irony when I rode with that 7th Cavalry. I thought that we fought for the land of the free when we rode from Fort Lincoln that morning. And the band they played that Gary Owen, brass was shining, flags were flowing. I swear if I had only known, I'd wish that I'd died back at Vicksburg. Barely escaped from the hell that was Ireland in 48. 2 angry young lads who'd learned how to hate, but we loved the idea of America, and we'd find a better life somehow in the land where no man has to plow. It's seen right then, it seems right now, that Patty had died for the Union. Somehow got turned around. He'd stolen the dream that he thought he'd found. Now I never will see that holy ground, for I turned it to something I hated. And upon it by the Gary Owen, drums a beating, bugles blowing. I swear if I had only known, I'd lie with my brother. I hope you guys could hear the banjo fills in that. That was just awesome. Very cool. The war ended, but prejudice continued. Irishmen were stereotyped as slow-thinking and devious, prone to drunkenness and fighting, and Irish biddies were called lazy and incompetent. For the famine generation, life remained a struggle. America indeed had provided opportunity, but that only meant rising from the pauper class up to poverty. Such conditions would change, though, for the famine generation's children, as the Irish in America became Irish Americans. 2 million Irish came to the United States between 1870 and 1920. No longer famine migrants, but people often with relatives already here seeking opportunity. Connecticut was leading America's explosive industrial expansion. The 3rd smallest state, Connecticut in 1900 ranked 11th in manufacturing. It produced 79% of America's brass and copper goods, 76% of its ammunition, 64% of all clocks, and 46% of all hardware. It was a major producer of bicycles, automobiles, typewriters, fabrics, rifles, and rubber goods. The demand for new consumer products was insatiable, as was the need for new factories and workers. Ireland alone could not provide enough labor, so migrants from Italy, Russia, Germany, Canada, Poland, and Sweden helped create a Connecticut in which, by 1900, immigrants and their children outnumbered the original Yankee stock. What made this a watershed period for the Irish was that now 2nd-generation Irish Connecticutans, persons born in Connecticut to Irish parents, began to outnumber Irish immigrants. That changed Irish culture in Connecticut, and it changed Connecticut itself. Second-generation Irish Americans enjoyed significant social mobility. Retaining their sense of Irish distinctiveness, they thoroughly embraced being Connecticutans and Americans, and they were rewarded with opportunities denied their parents. By 1900, 2/3 of second-generation Irishmen worked in skilled trades or hired, with economic security that mirrored that of the Connecticut Yankees. They dominated police and fire departments, and they monopolized the building trades. And while 90% of their mothers remained domestics, second-generation Irish-American women became clerks, skilled factory workers, teachers, and union organizers. Better jobs came in part because of high Irish involvement in Connecticut's labor movement. Irish Americans made up most of many unions' membership and leadership. Union involvement and political involvement intermingled. In the 1880s, the Irish-led Knights of Labor elected 30 pro-labor members to the Connecticut House. In 1901, a new labor group, organized on St. Patrick's Day, elected Connecticut Federation of Labor President Ignatius Sullivan mayor of Hartford. By World War I, the Irish dominated Connecticut's city and state politics. In 1960, the Hartford Courant claimed, "The Irish people are born politicians. They fit naturally into politics." Then they went on, "The Irish, though, are apt to do well at anything they undertake." This glowing recognition of Irish ability completely reversed the Courant's racist anti-Irish stance of the famine years and showed how far acceptance of Irish Connecticutans had advanced. Second-generation Irish Americans were now a model for the new Italian, Russian, and Polish immigrants to emulate. While they are Irish, they are more essentially American, the Courant wrote, even as they are maintaining the traditions of their ancestors. Now here's a turn of the 20th century song that reflects the renewed sense of pride the Irish Americans felt in their heritage. It's from a Broadway play called Colleen, and the song is called "Tell Them That You're Irish."
Now, Dennis, don't forget that when you cross the ocean foam, you leave your poor old mother all alone.
All alone.
Should they ask you of your country in any place you roam, confess to them you're Irish to the bone.
To the bone.
'Tis not the nationality, 'tis not the creed nor dress that help to make a good and honest youth.
Honest youth.
If asked where you belong to, straightforwardly confess your mother taught her boy to speak the truth. Tell them that you're Irish, never mind their frowns.
Tell them your ancestors were people of great renown. Tell them that your father and your mother are the same. Though they found a measure of acceptance, the Irish still remained different to most and suspect to some. Most anti-Irish feeling was related to Catholicism, that ancient and still feared enemy of the Puritan founders. Connecticutans felt ambivalence toward the state's Catholic institutions. On the one hand, church leaders promoted old-line Yankee virtues, temperance, education, virtue. But the church hierarchy, led by Irish-American priests and bishops, still answered to a foreign pope, whose ability to command obedience seemed un-American, perhaps even a threat to national security. And the Connecticut church was large and powerful. By 1935, Connecticut had over 500,000 Catholics, served by 292 churches, 39 religious communities, 4 hospitals, 100 parochial schools, 3 colleges, and 4 seminaries. It was a force to be reckoned with, and for some to be feared. So, even as Irish Americans moved up and out to Connecticut's new streetcar suburbs, they became targets of a virulent anti-Catholic movement that flourished in the 1920s and remained significant right up to the 1960 election of John Kennedy. The Ku Klux Klan held anti-Catholic, cross-burning rallies throughout the state. One such event in Manchester attracted nearly 10,000 people. Irish Catholics countered this surge of anti-Catholic hostility through groups like the Knights of Columbus. Founded in New Haven in 1882 by an Irish Civil War veteran, the Knights espoused fervent American patriotism and pan-ethnic Catholicism, and they grew to 782,000 members by the early 1920s. Through resisting Catholic persecution, Irish Americans began to identify as militant American Catholics, and by the 1930s, Connecticut's Irish Americans thought of themselves as Irish Catholics, too. One thing that helped the American Irish Catholic community weather anti-Catholic sentiment was their immensely appealing presence in American popular culture. Irish Americans put an indelible Irish stamp on American entertainment through Tin Pan Alley songs such as When Irish Eyes Are Smiling and Mother McCree, films like The Fighting Sullivans and Yankee Doodle Dandy, movie priests like Spencer Tracy and Pat O'Brien, and heartthrobs like Bing Crosby. Newt Rockney's Fighting Irish became a sports legend, while in New London, Eugene O'Neill, the second-generation son of Irish actors, worked on plays that won him the Nobel Prize. These cultural productions reinforced the idea that Irish Americans were Americans through and through, just different Americans, and much of that difference was connected to their Catholicism. 20th century American Catholicism required rigorous and disciplined observance of its proverbs. Through the 1960s, family rosaries were common, and religious paintings, statuary, and icons were part of many Catholic homes. The Latin Mass, wearing veils, secret confessions, and other rituals set American Catholics off markedly from their Protestant peers. Such difference didn't keep Connecticut Catholics from continuing up the socio-political and economic ladder. Everywhere, one saw proof of Irish political dominance. In 1934, Francis Maloney of Meriden defeated a prominent old-line Yankee to become Connecticut's first Irish senator. Robert Hurley, a second-generation Irish-American from Bridgeport, became Connecticut's first Irish Catholic governor in 1941. James C. Shannon became the second in 1948. John Dempsey of Cahir in County Tipperary became the state's first foreign-born governor in 1961. And the legacy of his remarkable decade in office has been a tendency to award the office of governor to people of Irish descent. Since Dempsey, half of Connecticut's governors have claimed Irish heritage. Brian McMahon, an immensely popular United States senator from Norwalk, set his sights on the presidency itself in 1952. His sudden diagnosis and death from cancer, however, put an end to a promising candidacy almost before it started. McMahon's belief, though, that an Irish Catholic could become president was shared by John Bailey, who stage managed Connecticut Democratic politics through the century's middle decades. In 1956, Bailey tried unsuccessfully to secure the Democratic vice presidential nomination for Massachusetts Senator John Fitzgerald Kennedy, arguing that in key states, having a Catholic on the ticket would bring more votes than it cost. 4 years later, with Bailey as a key advisor, Kennedy became the first Irish Catholic American president. This was a watershed moment. For Irish Catholics, it marked the crumbling of the final barrier to full American political acceptance. Combined with Irish dominance of the American Catholic Church hierarchy and their leadership of America's most important labor unions, the Irish had indeed fully arrived. To we who lived through it, it seemed that with Kennedy's election, and if not then, certainly with his assassination, anti-Catholicism in America largely evaporated. But the irony was that at this moment of greatest achievement, Irish Americans' identification with their Irish roots began to wane. Many Irish Connecticutans moved to new ex-urban suburbs, where acceptance into the dominant culture meant they were far more likely to marry outside their ethnic group. Fewer than 50% married other Irish Americans in the 1960s. Interest in traditional Irish organizations, such as the Ancient Order of Hibernians, declined, and St. Patrick's Day parades, celebrated in Connecticut since 1842, became a challenge to fund. In 1961, television host and Irish tenor Dennis Day lamented, "I don't think Irish records sell very well now. There's not enough demand. The second generation Irishman in this country doesn't want to sing except on St. Patrick's Day when they do My Wild Irish Rose." No wonder then that as America faced the challenges of the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War, some questioned whether the emerald green in Irish America was fading to a tattered red, white, and blue. The Civil Rights Movement, the war in Vietnam, the assassination of two Kennedys, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, shook American society to the core. Primary values were called into question, as was the legitimacy of fundamental institutions. In the 1950s, to be Irish in America had meant to be a devout Catholic, a vote-the-ticket Democrat, and a fierce American patriot. The 60s changed all that for many. Vatican II transformed militant Catholicism into vernacular ecumenism, and combined with changing attitudes towards sexual freedom, birth control, and divorce, the Church's authority was weakened and its institutional structure began to crumble. Regular Mass attendance dropped from 74% in 1958 to around 30% today. A quarter of American Catholic marriages now end in divorce. Over time, many Connecticut Catholics left the church altogether. Vocations declined, and many, many parochial schools shut down. As faith ties weakened, so did ethnic distinctions. Whereas racial ethnic identifiers such as the Irish race or the German race once segmented whites into different groups, the white-black racial divide of the Civil Rights Movement made ethnic distinctions superfluous. Identifying as Irish American now became a choice one made, not a label assigned at birth. Irish American loyalty to the Democratic Party also loosened as disaffected Irish Democrats swung decisively over to the Republicans. No longer dependent on the party for protection or patronage, some Irish Americans eagerly became conservative Republicans, even here in blue state Connecticut. Every Irish American was now free to choose what it meant to be an Irish American and an Irish Connecticut. Many, often the older generations, clung to the traditional trilogy: attend Mass, vote Democratic, and fly the American flag. But others embraced a new Irishness based on pride in ancestry and immersion in the history, culture, and traditions of the old country. Irish traditional music, the Clancy Brothers and Tommy Makem, the Chieftains and the Wolf Tones, was at the core of this new approach, with songs like this one. One, two, three, four, 1, 2, 3.
Boyhood's fire was in my blood. I read of ancient free men, for Greece and Rome, who bravely stood, 300 men and 3 men. And then I dreamed I yet might see our betters rent in twain, and Ireland long a province be, a nation once again, a nation once again, a nation once again, and Ireland long a province be, a nation once again. So as I grew from boy to man, I bent me to that bidding. My spirit of each selfish plan and cruel passion ridding. For thus I hoped someday to end. Oh, can such hope be vain, when my dear country shall be made a nation once again, a nation once again, say, a nation once again, and Ireland long a province be, a nation once again, a nation once again, a nation once again, and Ireland long a province be, a nation once again.
Irish bars spruced up and expanded. Ceilidh classes sprung, and fetches and festivals. And that was before Michael Flatley and then Titanic made us want to climb onto a ship and step dance with Kate Winslet. One can dream. At both Yale and UConn, new courses offered Gaelic and Irish literature. And at Quinnipiac University, the Great Hunger Museum opened in 2012. The interest in Irish heritage continues. And the exhibit that was here earlier this year certainly confirms that that interest is active and ongoing, and that it produces really magnificent work. It's a testament to all that is best in the state and country, that the story of the Irish in Connecticut reminds us that ours is a nation with a long history of taking in refugees, even those we have feared, and that those immigrants we once saw as the frightening other became over time enough like us to make us better, even as they cherished both what they became and the heritage they would always have, the people they would always be. In that spirit, let's close with a final chorus of that memorable Irish American song that most of you probably heard for the first time this afternoon. Tell them that you're Irish. So if you would join us, don't be shy. This is our moment where I hereby anoint you all Irish by the power invested in me as an Anglo-Connecticut. Tell them that you're Irish, never mind the frown. Tell them your ancestors were people of great renown. Tell them that your father and your mother are the same, and never be ashamed to say you own an Irish name. Again, tell them that you're Irish, never mind the frowns. Tell them your ancestors were people of great renown. Tell them that your father and your mother are the same, and never be ashamed to say you own an Irish name. Wonderful. Wow, this made my day.